Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Thank you and welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. And joining us for this special impeachment debrief, we have Washington Post chief political correspondent Dan Balz. Dan, it's not the morning, it's the afternoon. We are on the other side of impeachment. Lots of twists and turns that happened on Saturday, but Donald Trump is now the twice impeached, twice acquitted, now former president of the United States. Senator Mitt Romney was the only Republican to vote for an article of impeachment in 2020. He was joined by six other Republicans this go round, the largest bipartisan vote for conviction in American history. But the big question here is, how are you thinking through this outcome and what it means for the health of our democracy?
It's a really good question, Jonathan. I think that everybody is now through the second of these impeachments. We knew going into the first one and into the second one that there was no likelihood that the then president and now former president would be convicted in either case. I think it raises questions about what impeachment really means in this day and age when you have politics as polarized and as partisan as they are. You did note that this was the most bipartisan impeachment vote in the history of the country, but nonetheless, it was one that went in a predictable way as the bulk of the Republicans in the Senate stuck with the former president to vote for acquittal in the face of what seemed to be overwhelming evidence presented by the House managers led by Congressman Jamie Raskin. Going forward, it leaves the former president free to pursue whatever political role he might want. We don't exactly know what that's going to be. He's obviously talked about maybe running in 2024. That's a long way off, and we know that other Republicans will be doing the same. We don't know how he will try to influence the 2022 elections, other than probably playing in a number of primaries in order to get candidates who are loyal to him and to his view of the world. We're at a transition point. Obviously, this is now President Biden's time in the limelight, and we will have to see what the former president decides to do with whatever influence he has at this point.
Dan, can we talk about the kerfuffle over witnesses on Saturday? Lead House impeachment manager Jamie Raskin came in and said, we want to call a witness. We want to call Congresswoman Butler of Washington. That then led to a vote on whether witnesses should be called. That resolution passed. And then they opted to just put her statement in the record. And so I'm just wondering, what exactly happened here? Did the White House get involved and say, please end this trial today? Or was it a bluff? What?
Well, I don't think it was a bluff, and I don't believe that the White House was the instrument of ultimately shutting down the idea of witnesses, although it was certainly something that the White House would have wanted. They had always indicated, the president and others in the administration had indicated that they preferred a quick trial, not a prolonged one. And when the resolution for witnesses was approved, I think it threw everything kind of up in the air because nobody knew exactly what that meant. The House managers had asked for only one witness at that point, but obviously then that required negotiations, and the Trump lawyers were, talking about a list of 300 people, which was never going to happen. But I think that it indicated that there could be a much more prolonged trial. Even to call a few witnesses would have delayed the trial for some time, because you have to gather the testimony, you have to take the depositions, it then has to be introduced. So I think that in the end, people realized that there was probably no great value in prolonging a trial, even with a witness like Congressman Butler, that it was not going to make a material difference in the outcome of the case.
Actually, and that was the next question I was going to ask you, Dan. Would witnesses have even made a difference?
I think unlikely, Jonathan, because Mitch McConnell, prior to that, had already indicated where his vote was going to go. Before they started up on Saturday morning, he had let everybody in his caucus know that he was going to vote to acquit the former president. That was such a decisive vote and an indication that there would be fewer Republicans likely to go along with conviction than if McConnell had been willing to vote for conviction himself. So I think that spelled the end of any prospect of 17 Republicans voting to convict him. And I think at that point, the Biden administration has a considerable amount of work that they're trying to do. They have nominations backed up in the pipeline that are vital to getting their government organized. Obviously, they have the COVID relief package, which they're eager to get moved as quickly as possible. A trial that may have gone on for another week or probably 2 weeks would have damaged the Biden administration at that point without having a likely effect on the outcome of the trial.
Mm-hmm. We're running out of time, but I still have to ask you two questions. One, sticking with McConnell, what was up with this gambit? He votes in favor of acquittal. Then, in a floor speech after the vote, and Donald Trump is acquitted, found not guilty of inciting an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, in which we saw ample evidence. But I'll leave that aside. He then steps to the floor and basically restates the case that Jamie Raskin made at the beginning of the trial for how Donald Trump was responsible for the insurrection at the Capitol. Please explain what that was about.
Well, it was a blistering condemnation for sure, and I would defer to one of your next guests, George Will,
Yeah, I'm going to
who I
ask him.
thought wrote a very perceptive column about what Senator McConnell was up to. I mean, in shorthand, George can talk about this in more detail. I mean, in shorthand, a vote to convict, I suspect he thought would have stripped him of any authority to try to guide the party in the future, that would have so alienated a much wider swath of the party. By having voted to acquit and then condemning the former president, he was beginning what George described as the longer project to winnow away the influence of the former president on the Republican Party and to turn it in a different direction.
The COVID-19 relief bill, as you referenced in your earlier answer, right now there are no Republicans who support it. So, what are you hearing about the progress? There's clearly going to go reconciliation. Will reconciliation actually get the COVID relief bill passed?
My guess is that it will get it passed, but I suspect there are still negotiations ahead, whether it is with some Republicans to try to continue to, show at least some modicum of interest in incorporating some of their ideas into the bill. But also there may be some negotiating with the likes of, Senator Manchin, who may not like the overall size of it or some particulars of it. So I think I would guess that it would go through the House pretty much as it looks now, and then face some negotiations and time in the Senate. It's not inconceivable that it will not end up at $1.9 trillion, but might be somewhat short of that. But I think it's been made clear by President Biden that the basic outlines are ones that he believes in and believes that the package as a whole needs to stay whole, and will push to do that in a timely way. I mean, I think he is determined not to get caught up in a long slog to get this passed, given the urgency of it and given the fact that some of the benefits that people now get begin to expire next month.
Dan, we always end up running out of time just when we're getting going, but we are out of time. So as always, Dan Balz, thank you very much for coming to First Look.
Jonathan, thank you. Pleasure as always.
And now let's go over to the opinion side of the post where we'll find my colleagues, Washington Post columnist George Will and deputy editorial page editor Ruth Marcus. And George, I'm going to start with you since I asked Dan a question, which I should be asking you. And so I'm going to ask you about the column that you wrote about Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Flesh out what was McConnell up to? Why did he vote to acquit and then take a flamethrower to Donald Trump in his floor speech afterwards?
First, I think he believed what he said about the constitutional case. He said, it's a close call. There are brilliant scholars on both sides, but I, Mitch McConnell, believe that the point of the impeachment clause in the Constitution is to remove from office offending officers of the federal government. Therefore, since this president has been removed by the voters and by the calendar, it didn't obtain. We can only speculate as to whether the Senator McConnell, who gave the blistering speech after the vote, would have voted differently if this had occurred while Mr. Trump was still in office. Suppose the riot we'd compressed the post-election turmoil and the riot had occurred in November. I think it's a reasonable inference from what he said on the floor that in that case, he might have voted to convict. I don't know that, I'm just speculating. Clearly, he did not want subsequent fights with Trump, and he is girding for a lot of subsequent fights, particularly in the 2022 political cycle. He did not want that to be framed as McConnell against Trump. And you could just see how it would have been that way if he had voted to convict. Mm-hmm. So this was, I think, a case where his political interests and his constitutional convictions converged and buttressed one another.
Ruth, on this issue of what George was just talking about, if the insurrection had happened in November and the impeachment trial happened, then maybe McConnell would have voted to convict. But as George was speaking, I kept thinking about the fact that the article of impeachment was passed while Trump was still president of the United States, and it was then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell who refused to come back into session to accept the article of impeachment. Doesn't McConnell bear some responsibility for what happened here?
I think that's a totally fair point, Jonathan. Look, Senator McConnell had an op-ed in another newspaper, alas, this morning, where he elaborated on that a little bit, and he said, he effectively said, even if I had called taken it up, we wouldn't have had time to finish the trial in a way that constituted due process for President Trump. So don't blame me for not being willing to take it up because we couldn't have finished it. I think that, pardon me for being a little bit cynical here and a little bit questioning. Let's give Senator McConnell the benefit of the doubt on his constitutional interpretation. It is a difficult constitutional question, but the reality is that Senator McConnell for 4 years kept his tongue, for the most part, about the depredations and behavior of President Trump. And so the notion that Senator McConnell, if it had happened in November, would have voted to convict President Trump on the same grounds, I have a kind of hard time seeing that. I think Senator McConnell was doing what he thought was best for Senate Republicans and for his most important project, which is for Republicans to regain the Senate majority in 2022. The interesting question for me, and I'm really interested in knowing what George has to say about this, is what the impact of those blistering words, I think that flamethrower line is really the best way to explain this, is on those Senate candidates in 2022, because Senator Lindsey Graham was on television yesterday talking about how McConnell's words are going to be thrown at every Senate candidate who comes up in the future. I noticed that yesterday also the Senate Republican official account tweeted out, well, that was a waste of time. Does Senator McConnell really think that the impeachment trial was a waste of time, given everything that he had to say about the president? So I think it's going to be a really interesting test for Senate Republicans going forward to be continued to be asked, are you with Senator McConnell or are you with President Trump?
And actually, George, that is, answer that question also, because you've called the 2022 midterm elections, George, quote, perhaps the most crucial non-presidential election year in U.S. history.
Yes, if McConnell's words are out there to be used, that is, if they are used in the 2022 Republican primaries, either primaries to select candidates for open seats or primaries run against incumbents who are deemed insufficiently loyal to Mr. Trump. If Mr. McConnell's words are used, I think that's just fine with him. He is spoiling for a fight. He knows he can't avoid one, so he might as well do it with enthusiasm. And the fight is going to be when Mr. Trump says, I have a candidate who represents me and my values and my approach to politics and my sulfuric rhetoric and all the rest. And Mitch McConnell says, well, that's a sure way to lose in November. I think you're going to see a fight, a healthy inter-party fight. And by speaking the words that Lindsey Graham is afraid he'll hear again, I think McConnell said, you're darn right you're going to hear them again, because this is, I'm categorizing an entire style of politics that we don't want to become the brand of the Republican Party.
But at this point, George, who do you think is going to win that fight? The McConnell wing of the party or the Trump wing of the party?
Well, it's a little early to say, but I think Mr. McConnell is a prodigious fundraiser. And I think his leadership PAC had spent something like $460 million in the 2020 elections. And then in the 2 months between the election and the Georgia runoffs, raised another $150 million. So he will not be a prophet unarmed. He will. We'll see who can raise more money, and we'll see how much money matters. We're all aware, I think, of the declining marginal utility of the last political dollar. So there are limits to what you can do with money, but you have to have money to disseminate your advocacy, and he will have it. And we will see if Mr. Trump's entertainment value remains what it is now. My feeling is that he's become, in some ways, so predictable. He has one pedal on the organ, he uses it all the time, and he's what an entertainer must never be, which is predictable and hence, in the end, boring. So we'll see if 2 years from now. We all know the old axiom that overnight is a long time and a week is forever in American politics. We're talking a year from now, these primaries will be underway. And
I like that.
It's going to be a different.
I'm sorry, I stomped all over there, George. I just love that one pedal on the organ metaphor. I'm going to have to figure out a way to use it, and credit you. Ruth, so now that Donald Trump has been acquitted a second time, and I'm just wondering if the impeachment clause of the Constitution remains an effective check on executive power anymore.
No person wants to be impeached, even if he understands, like Donald Trump, that the impeachment vote was rigged and so he's going to win it. No president wants to be impeached once. No president wants to be impeached twice. And few presidents, thank goodness, are going to be anything like Donald Trump in terms of his willingness to ignore the advice of the people around him and take actions that clearly risk impeachment. So I don't think that the impeachment provision is a dead letter. I do think that the outcome here is a reflection not of the kind of weakness of the impeachment clause itself, but of the incredible partisan situation that we find ourselves in, where impartial jurors knew where their partiality lied before they heard a single piece of evidence. I do have to say, I find myself in this odd position, though I've been quite critical of Senator McConnell over time and was somewhat critical of him in his vote to acquit. I do think it took, I don't think people in my ideological neck of the woods recognize, and maybe George could speak to this, what bravery actually it took, even after the fact, for McConnell to unleash those words on the former president. And in the contest between Team McConnell and Team Trump, I'm actually on the side of Team McConnell. I do hope he brings some sanity back to the Republican Party because it badly needs it.
Well, since you're the lawyer here, Ruth, I have to ask you this question about Donald Trump and the mounting legal pressure that he's under. Do you think, given the cases that are in Georgia, the cases in New York, the potential case here in DC, do you think we will see Donald Trump prosecuted in some, all, none of these cases?
Answer some. I'm thinking about the scene in Jaws where the captain, I think it is, says, I think we're going to need a better boat, bigger boat. I think Donald Trump is going to need some better lawyers than the ones that he had. I think that in terms of Senator McConnell actually, interestingly, invoked the specter and availability of criminal prosecution of President Trump. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him to be prosecuted directly for his role in the insurrection. There are a lot of First Amendment protections for him there that didn't obtain, in my view, didn't apply in the Senate trial. That would make it difficult to prosecute him for that. I think the Georgia investigation is a very serious and well-taken investigation into his effort to meddle in the election outcome and vote tallying there. And that's going to that could well end up in something. And then there are two other things that we should think about. One is the criminal investigations that don't involve his actions as president, but involve, and this is primarily the New York investigation, involve his conduct as a private citizen and whether some of his financial shenanigans amounted to criminal violations. And finally, I think that there is a very serious prospect of private litigation against the president, that some of those who were injured in or survivors of those who were tragically killed in the insurrection might have a private cause of action against the president for his role there. And that would be a lower standard of proof and would allow us to get some discovery. I would like to be around for taking the president's deposition on that in order to bring out some of the information and get some degree of justice about the riot itself.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because that reminded me that today, this morning, there is a lawsuit filed against Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani by the NAACP on behalf of Congressman Benny Thompson, who's the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee. And I'm just wondering, I want both of you to weigh in here, but Ruth, you go first. I don't know how much you know about this lawsuit, but what do you make of an entity like the NAACP filing suit on behalf of a sitting member of Congress against the former president of the United States and his lawyer?
I think that's what John Lewis would call good trouble, maybe. That look, if I'm going to imagine what Congressman Thompson would be claiming here, that he was put in danger and injured in some way since by the president's conduct. I think there are probably stronger plaintiffs to get there. Somebody who was one of the Capitol Hill police officers who was physically injured. I do think that I was tweeting about this a little bit yesterday. You get into really complicated questions about the president's sovereign immunity as a government official from liability for his actions and things like that. So I wouldn't start to take that to the bank, but I do think that you easily could get to a situation with the right plaintiff where you could get discovery of something that's really important. And the other mechanism for that, of course, is what Speaker Pelosi said today, which is to have a 9/11 style commission. I think it's imperative. We did not have witnesses in the trial. There were good and legitimate reasons that we didn't have witnesses in the trial, but that's a frustration. And we do need to know through some mechanism, what was Donald Trump doing? What was going on at the White House? What did he know? And why didn't he do something about it when he knew it, about the insurrection? And so whether it's through a 9/11 style commission, which I fully support, or through private litigation, I think I'm very, very interested in knowing more facts about that. And I think we deserve to know them.
George, your thoughts? Weigh in on both those, the private litigation and the 9/11 style commission.
I'm all in favor of the 9/11 style commission because I think this was a large event in American history, the first 6th day of January in this year. We need to know about the precursors. We need to know about who was talking to whom and what networks on social media and all the rest were triggered, as it were, by the rhetoric of the president in November and all through December. We have to be very careful in trying to prosecute people for incitement, because then you have to ascribe social causation to words, and that gets very difficult. On the other hand, if Oliver Wendell Holmes' famous formulation, a speech that poses a clear and present danger, if the president's speech right before the rioters went up and started to riot didn't constitute a clear and present danger, what would? So if there's any application for the Holmes formulation, this, it seems to me, would be it. This is why I think the commission should tell us how did these people get assembled? What did they come here expecting? And what can we learn from what they said to one another in social media as to their intentions? Because that is the context in which the president did incite.
In the little bit of time that we have left, I want to talk about, now that Trump and impeachment and the trial is now in, at least the trial is in the rearview mirror, all focus has turned back to the White House, to President Biden and his administration, and in particular, the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that is making its way through Congress. Ruth, and then George, what do you make of the prospects of the bill actually getting passed on the timetable that the president wants it passed?
Not in its $1.9 trillion entirety, for a variety of reasons that Dan alluded to earlier. There's going to be some reluctance to go for a price tag that hefty, even among the Democratic senators. There's going to be some logistical reasons that some aspects of it can't survive. This is my favorite phrase, the bird bath, not BYRD, in terms of complying with the rules that limit what you can do through the mechanism of reconciliation. But I do think that we are going to see I can't even remember how many zeros are in a trillion.
Me either.
But
a lot of them.
A figure that is way greater than 600 billion and in excess of a trillion passed again within a pretty short time, in advance of the expiration of some of these benefits in March. So this was almost inevitable, but I think it's been healthy that the president and Republican senators have tried to go through some process of seeing if there's a deal to be made. It doesn't look like it.
George?
Yes, the unfortunate thing would be, to go back to the bird rule, if they tried to ram everything on their wish list into this one bill and put it through in reconciliation, that is by a simple majority vote. And if they include, for example, a $15 minimum wage nationally, and then suppose the Senate parliamentarian says, as the Senate parliamentarian should, that this violates the bird rule, then of course they can simply overrule the parliamentarian, and we will be back into situational ethics being the only ethics anyone has up there much of the time. That would be very unfortunate. Let's be clear, most of the $1.9 billion has precious little to do with COVID-19. It has to do with bailing out largely blue states that were in deep trouble financially before COVID-19. It's an infusion of a stimulus to an economy that is about to explode as soon as we get herd immunity. Is going to explode with pent-up consumer demand. So it's an economic policy that is simply out of whack with the actual condition of the economy, which right now is remarkably good.
You know what? We've actually run out of time. I still have a whole lot more questions. But Ruth Marcus, George Will, thank you very much for coming back to First Look.
Glad to be
Thanks,
with
Scott.
you.
And as always, thank you for tuning in. Post Live will be back in an hour and a half at 2 p.m. Eastern for a conversation with Evan McMullen, former independent candidate for president in 2016, now Chief Policy Director for the House, and a Chief Policy Director for the House Republican Conference. He'll speak with my colleague Jackie Alamany about recent efforts to chart a course forward for the GOP. So again, 2 p.m. Eastern Time today, Evan McMullen. Once again, I'm Jonathan Capehart, opinion writer for the Washington Post. Thank you for watching First Look on Washington Post Live.